One is the whole concept of how you communicate back and forth. That is, whether or not you lecture, and that's all it is. Now let me see if I can't. Where do you think the biggest problem is? Is it the problem with what we're talking about or how we organized our lesson? Is it our relationship with our people? Or is it how we're giving it? Let me, before I find out what you think, let me ask you another question. If you were to get a room full like this of students who attend classes at school or college, Sunday school classes, church groups, whatever, and you were to ask them, what's the normal class like that you attend? Not the unbelievable ones, but the normal one. What's it like? On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you vote it? 10 would be the highest and the best, and 1 would be, as my son would call it, it's the pits, it's no good. Where would you vote it to be? The average one that you attend. How many would say, I think it's a 10, vote once. You vote by raising your hand, okay? How many would say 10? How many would say 9? How many say 8? 3. How many say 7? About 4. How many say 6? You can begin voting now anytime you want. About 10. How many say 5? About 20% of the audience. How many say 4? Ooh, another 20%. Let's not ask any more questions. If you take a look at that average then, what's the average for this group? On a scale of 1 to 10. It's a 4. Do you know what the national average is in America? We've done this for thousands of people. 4.5. Do you realize what grade that would be on a report card? How many did you get right out of 100? I got 45. How are we doing? Now, why do we say it's 4.5, friends? Because class is so what? What is it? Boring. Now, who told you all to say that word? Do you know that 80% of the people around the country, when asked, why did you vote it so low, say the same word, just like you did? It's the same word. We've done this in Singapore, the Philippines, Great Britain, Australia, all over the world. It's the same word. Boring. Class is so boring. Now, where does boredom come from? Is boredom primarily an issue of what you're talking about? Or your relationship with your people? Or how you're talking about what you're talking about? What do you think it is? It's a combination, but it's by far one of them. How many say it's the subject? How many say it's the student relationship? How many say it's the style relationship? That's right. It's the style. That is, it's how you talk about what you're going to be talking about. And somehow we think in our own minds that style isn't in our control. My friend, style is in your control. It's in my control. Style is what you do with your body. If you say about a person who's a teacher that they're boring, what will they be doing with their voice? They'll be speaking in a what tone? Monotone. Now, how many of you can speak in a monotone? How many of you can decide, I'm not going to speak in a monotone, I'm going to speak in a polytone? Yeah, how many of you can speak nice on a high tone? Say hello, ready? Hello. Now low voice, hello, ready? Hello. How many of you are able to do that? The point of it is that isn't full of your control. What else is in control? Moving your hands. What do boring speakers do with their hands? The Adam and Eve pose. Now, we've realized that, and we've put together a series on how to have a powerful style. An audio series we'll be talking about at a later time. Because this is number one, and we've seen many people totally revolutionized when they realize the fact that style isn't out of your control, it's in your control, not out of it. You can change it like that. You're saying, you don't know me. Yes, I do. If you can move your voice up and down, and you can move your hands, and you can move your head, and you can turn around, you can have a style. Whatever you do, however, change it once in a while. If somebody says in your class, I can never understand what they're talking about. I mean, what's the problem? Subject. What should you do with that problem? Answer, cut your content in half. What happens if somebody says all they do is lecture, 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 lecture? What's the problem? Quickly. So, what if somebody says, you know, I never learned anything in that class. I mean, we have a great time together, but, you know, I don't come away with anything. What's the problem? Not enough subject. You seeing how you're isolating it? Which one is it? What do I have to do to fix it? The number one problem, 80% of the number one problem is style. Therefore, learn how to fix it. You know what the number two problem is? Subject. 20%, well actually 15% of the remaining 20% comes from subject. Only 5% is problem with the relationship with the people. Now let's see if we can then talk about some tips about using this method called the Apple Maximizers. Number one, love your students consistently and unconditionally. Love your students consistently and unconditionally. Too many teachers love their content, not their students. They love to communicate. They don't love their students. 1 Peter 4 says, above all things have what? Fervent love. Fervent love for your people. Number two, express the subject in terms of the people's or the students' needs and interests. And we have a whole law about this. Number three, alter your style regularly according to each situation. I remember speaking at the Billy Graham Cove one year at Ben Lippen. And after the session was over, there was a young man, maybe in his 25, 26, who was an associate pastor who said to me, I need to talk to you after the session. So after everybody left, I noticed he was sitting in a chair over here by himself. And the way he was sitting in his chair was, his body was screaming, I'm broken, I'm defeated, I'm despairing. Now, what was my body language when I came over to him? I had to alter my style, which was a teaching style, to a counseling style. In what kind of voice? Soft. How did I sit on my chair? No. Sit back, calm. He was having a real problem with the senior pastor. And he said, I'm going to leave the church unless you can help me solve my problem with the senior pastor. But as I was talking to that person right there, I looked in the back of the big auditorium. In the back was my wife, who's 5'2", talking to this man who's about 6'6", big guy, with his wife. And the lady was like this, and the man was like this. And my poor wife, who was a gift of mercy, was dying. And she kept looking up at me, and I kept praying, Lord, don't fix it for me. I'm too tired to deal with this. Finally, I remember leaving this young man and heading in the background, and I realized I have a mess on my hands. And this big guy, they were in the midst of breaking up, having a divorce. Turns out they've been to all kinds of counselors, and he wanted some help. At least he said he wanted some help. And every time I tried to help him, he began to argue with me, and he would start to yell and intimidate. And finally, I tried to raise my voice a little bit to try and alter my style to meet his needs. And finally, he began to, every time I tried to help him, he would fight it. And I looked at Darlene and winked at her with this eye to let her know this is an act. Don't be fooled. And I started to yell at him, and he yelled at me. And I kept yelling at him. He kept yelling, pounding on his chest, until finally he stopped being so arrogant and started to listen. And in time broke down and was able to restore that marriage right in the back of that room. Well, I really was after this guy. I mean, I was pounding on a guy's chest like this. Well, afterwards, they left, and I noticed Darlene had walked kind of off to the side. And she said, I've never seen you like that in all my life. You're not going to talk to me like that, are you? I said, did you see me wink? Well, yeah, but I just thought you had something in your eye. I was trying to let you know this is a role I was going to play for him. My friends, when you get up to teach, You have to play a role. When I'm a father, I play a role. When I'm a husband, I play a role. When I'm a president, I play a role. Which one is me? I'm all of them. But when I get up to teach, I'm teacher role. If I talk to this fine lady here one-on-one, it's this tone of voice, right? Appropriate, just one-on-one, and we kind of talk quietly together. And if I just keep that tone of voice, then I go on up to here to become teacher to this crowd, and I just start to talk to you about how nice a night it is, and it's nice being with you, and it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? It's the wrong style. Can you change your style? Of course you can. If you, down deep inside of you says, I'm the one who has to cause you to learn, and if it's not working, I'll change my style. Got it? Got it? Good. Number 4, rest in your talents and gifts and be yourself. It's amazing how many of us want the other person's gift. If only I had their humor. If only I could speak like this person, then I'd be a teacher. I remember when I was in graduate school learning how to speak. We had a man come to the seminary to speak, and he was one of the professors. He was the same scholar that did this. And he spoke a sermon on Psalm 44 out of the Hebrew that was so overwhelming to me. I went to the library, checked the tape, wrote it all out hand, and memorized the sermon. And said to my wife, I can't wait for church to ask me to preach. I have this awesome sermon about the ziggurat and the Hebrew. It's really good. Well, nobody asked me for a long time. And finally there was a call one weekend and nobody else was around, and I was around, and they said, do you want this church? I said, man, I am ready. I have this great sermon. So we drove to this little tiny church. I couldn't wait to get up to preach Psalm 44. And I got up there and I got all my notes ready and I started lecturing. And within a minute, I realized they were not into it. And I emphasized the Hebrew part of it and the insights there. And I began to do this. And he would take us and he would talk to it. I was talking to it and I began to sweat like crazy. And I looked at my wife to get some encouragement. And she... It was so bad. And I was only on page 2. And I said to myself, say something else. And I said, I don't know anything else. This is it. I had to go through all 16 pages. And people were, you know, they weren't doing this. They were doing this. At quarter of, they were doing this. And I remember getting in the car driving home saying to my wife, sweetheart, I am quitting the ministry. I'm quitting the seminary. God's never called me to preach. And she says, well, I'll tell you one thing. What's that? He never called you to preach Dr. So-and-so's sermons. Don't preach somebody else's stuff. Don't try to be somebody else's stuff. And for Pete's sakes, don't do this. The next one. Know constantly your students' attitudes, attention, and actions.